The silver vinaigrette struck the conservatory door hard enough to leave a crescent dent in its lid. Aurelia Fenwick heard the blow from the morning room. She had been standing beside the escritoire at Caldermere House, sorting invitations for Lady Agatha Marchwood. When the sound came through the adjoining passage, it was followed by a muffled voice, too faint to make out, then silence. Lady Agatha did not look up from the card she was reading. "Miss Fenwick," she said. "The Duchess of Rotherby is to be placed above Lady Havisham." Surely I need not explain why. Aurelia set down the invitation in her hand. "Someone is in the conservatory." Lady Agatha's mouth tightened. "The gardeners are forever dropping things." That did not sound like a gardener. For 3 weeks, Aurelia had been a guest at Caldermere House, invited after the death of a distant relation had left her temporarily without a settled home. She was respectable enough to dine with the family, useful enough to be asked to help with correspondence, and poor enough that everyone understood the favor being done her, everyone except Esther Bellamy. Esther had treated her as neither dependent nor ornament. At 20, the Duke of Caldermere's ward was soft-spoken in company and unexpectedly funny in private. 2 nights before, sitting beside Aurelia in the small upstairs drawing room, Esther had twisted a handkerchief between her fingers and whispered that she had refused Giles Marchwood. Not hesitated, not asked for time. Refused. Yet that morning Aurelia had seen cards prepared for an engagement luncheon. She crossed the passage before Lady Agatha could stop her. The conservatory door stood closed. The exterior bolt had been drawn across. Aurelia stared at it. Then came another sound from within. "Aurelia, Esther." Aurelia lifted the bolt at once and opened the door. Esther stood near a bank of late roses, pale beneath the glass-filtered autumn light. Her hands were clenched against her skirts. On the tiled floor lay a small silver vinaigrette. Aurelia picked it up. One edge of the lid had been dented inward. "Were you locked in?" Esther's eyes flew toward the passage. "I was told I needed time to compose myself." "That is not what I asked." Esther swallowed. Before she could answer, Lady Agatha appeared in the doorway. "There you are," she said, with the composed displeasure of a woman discovering a servant had moved a chair without permission. "Esther, you have upset yourself. Quite enough." Aurelia straightened. Why was the door bolted? Lady Agatha's gaze settled on the vinaigrette in Aurelia's hand. "Because Miss Bellamy was overwrought. From the outside, you are becoming impertinent." Esther moved as though to speak. Lady Agatha turned toward her without raising her voice. "Go upstairs, my dear. Giles will call this afternoon, and I will not have him greeted by red eyes and foolish agitation." Esther went still. Aurelia had seen that stillness before. 2 nights earlier, just before Esther said, "I told him no." Aurelia stepped between them. She refused him. The silence was immediate. Lady Agatha's expression changed by less than an inch, but all warmth vanished from it. "You will apologize?" "No." The single word seemed almost indecent in Caldermere House. Lady Agatha drew herself taller. "You are a guest beneath my nephew's roof. You have been shown extraordinary kindness, Miss Fenwick. Do not mistake indulgence for equality." Aurelia felt Esther behind her, breathing too quickly. "I am not claiming equality with you, Lady Agatha. I am saying Miss Bellamy refused Mr. Marchwood, and yet an engagement is being prepared as though she had accepted him. You are repeating a confidence you have clearly misunderstood." "I understood the word no." Footsteps sounded in the passage. Lady Agatha turned first. Hugh Wroxham, Duke of Caldermere, entered without haste, but the room altered around him all the same. He was 38, tall, composed, and accustomed to having disorder resolve itself when he appeared. Aurelia had watched that happen at dinners, in estate discussions, even when 2 elderly dowagers argued over precedence. His authority was seldom loud because it had never needed to be. His gaze moved from his aunt to Esther, then to Aurelia. "What has happened?" Lady Agatha answered before anyone else. Miss Fenwick has accused me of attempting to force Esther into marriage. She has upset the girl and refuses to apologize. Hugh looked at Esther. Is that true? Esther's face had gone white. Aurelia turned toward him. Esther told me she refused Mr. Marchwood. His eyes came to hers. Did she say that today? No. Will she confirm it now? Aurelia did not answer for Esther. Lady Agatha did. She has already confirmed to me that she wishes to marry Giles. Miss Fenwick has taken one anxious conversation and built a scandal from it. Hugh's jaw tightened. He disliked scenes. Aurelia knew that much about him. He preferred facts, sequence, decision, and she saw the moment he chose decision before facts were complete. Miss Fenwick, he said, you have made a grave accusation against a member of my family. I have repeated what I was told. My aunt says you misunderstood. Then ask why the conservatory was bolted from the outside. His gaze flicked toward the door. Lady Agatha gave a quiet sigh. Esther was distressed. I wished her to have privacy. Privacy does not require a bolt on the corridor side, Aurelia said. Hugh's expression cooled. Enough. The words struck more sharply than if he had shouted. Esther flinched. Aurelia did not. Hugh looked at her with the controlled severity of a man who believed he was ending chaos. Apologize to my aunt, Miss Fenwick, or leave this house. Lady Agatha said nothing. Esther made a broken sound behind Aurelia. Aurelia looked at Hugh for a long moment. She had no father to return to, no brother with a spare room, no estate whose doors must open because of her name. Caldermere House was not merely comfortable. For the present, it was security. All she had to do was lower her head. I would like to understand precisely what apology your grace requires. Something in his face shifted. Aurelia continued. Am I to apologize for speaking bluntly? If so, I can regret that my words caused distress. Lady Agatha's eyes narrowed. But if you require me to apologize for saying, Miss Bellamy refused Mr. Marchwood, I cannot. Hugh's voice was quieter. You are prepared to leave over this? No, your grace. That answer surprised him. Aurelia opened her hand. The dented silver vinaigrette lay against her palm. I am prepared to leave rather than call truth a lie. She crossed to the table and placed it before him. I found this inside the conservatory. The door was bolted from the passage. Esther was inside. Hugh looked down at the damaged silver. Aurelia turned to Esther. She wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease the fear in the younger woman's face. Instead, she said only, You need not speak because I am leaving. Then she walked upstairs. Her belongings required one small valise. The only object she carried in her own hands was a green Morocco writing case, worn smooth at the corners, which had belonged to her father when he was a country clergyman. With more books than money, within half an hour, a hired carriage stood at the steps of Caldermere House. Aurelia did not look back from the window. Inside, Hugh remained in the morning room long after Lady Agatha and Esther had gone. The silver vinaigrette rested where Aurelia had left it. At last, he carried it himself to the conservatory. He opened the door, closed it, then stepped into the passage and examined the bolt. There was no corresponding fastening on the inside, no way for a person in the conservatory to draw it across. Hugh touched the fresh scrape along the metal with one finger. When he straightened, his face had changed. Send no announcement of Miss Bellamy's engagement, he told the footman, waiting beyond the passage. Your Grace, none. He looked once more at the bolt. Not until I have spoken to her myself. By 10 the next morning, the dented silver vinaigrette was locked in the Duke of Caldermere's escritoire, and Esther Bellamy sat opposite him in the small blue drawing-room with Mrs. Vale, the elderly housekeeper, quietly occupied near the window. Hugh had chosen the room because it was bright, ordinary, and impossible to mistake for an interrogation. Esther still looked as though she expected one. He did not sit behind a desk. Esther, he said, no announcement has been sent. Her fingers tightened around one another. I know. I want the truth from you, not the answer you think will make this house easier to manage." Her eyes flicked toward the door. Mrs. Vale did not look up from her sewing. Hugh waited. At last Esther said, "I wish to marry Mr. Marchwood." The sentence was precise, too precise. "Do you?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Because you love him." A faint color rose in her face. "Because it is a suitable match, and because affection may grow where duty is properly understood." Hugh went still. He had heard those words before, not from Esther, from Lady Agatha 3 weeks earlier when she had first suggested Giles as a possibility. Affection may grow where duty is properly understood. He leaned back slightly. "Did my aunt tell you to say that?" Esther looked at him then. "No." It came too quickly. He could have pressed harder. Once, that would have been his instinct. Questions until the contradiction broke. Authority until disorder yielded. Instead, he said, "Very well." Her surprise was almost painful to see. "You may go." Esther rose. At the door, Hugh spoke again. "Nothing will be announced today." She looked over her shoulder. For the first time, some emotion passed openly across her face. Relief. Then it vanished. After she had gone, Hugh remained seated for several moments. Mrs. Vale folded her sewing. "You noticed it too, Your Grace." "The phrasing?" She nodded. He stood. The conservatory passage was empty when he returned to it. Morning light showed the brass bolt more clearly than it had the night before. The metal itself was old. The damage was not. A narrow scrape cut through the paint beside the bolt plate. Along its edge, a flake of dark green paint had curled away recently enough to remain bright beneath. Hugh touched it with his thumb. Someone had drawn the bolt hard and recently. Lady Agatha found him there. "You are making a great deal from a childish scene." He turned. "You told me Esther required privacy." She did. "Then why fasten the door from the passage?" She was distressed. "That is not an answer." His aunt's expression cooled. "Must we now treat every feminine agitation as evidence of conspiracy?" "No." He looked at the scrape again. "But neither will I treat a locked door as privacy. Merely because it is convenient to call it so." By noon, Hugh was in his carriage. Mrs. Joan Pritchard lived in a modest but respectable house off Upper Brook Street, where polished brass and clean curtains announced careful means rather than wealth. Aurelia received him in the front parlor, with Mrs. Pritchard seated near the fire. She had changed very little since leaving Caldermere House. Same composed posture, same calm eyes. Only the green morocco writing case on the narrow desk beside her reminded him that she had packed quickly and gone because he had told her to. He bowed. "Miss Fenwick." "Your Grace." Mrs. Pritchard gave him the courtesy due his rank without any attempt to make him comfortable for having it. Hugh deserved that. "I spoke to Esther this morning," he said. Aurelia's expression sharpened. "What did she say?" "That she wishes to marry Giles." Aurelia did not answer at once. Mrs. Pritchard quietly shifted her chair farther toward the window, offering them conversational privacy without abandoning propriety. Hugh continued. "She used language I have heard from my aunt before, nearly word for word." Aurelia lowered her gaze. "You noticed?" "Yes." He came nearer the narrow writing desk, though he kept a proper distance. "I also examined the bolt, and fresh scraping, recent paint damage." Something eased in her face, but not triumph. He had expected perhaps vindication. Instead, she looked sad. "I am sorry." "For being right?" "For Esther." That answer struck him harder than accusation would have. He drew a breath. "I acted before I had investigated." Aurelia looked at him. "Yes." There was no cruelty in it. That made it worse. "I owe you an apology." "You do." He almost smiled despite himself. "Will you allow me to finish it?" "If you intend to." "I should have asked why you were willing to lose your place before deciding you had invented the reason." Her expression changed slightly. He went on. "I was impatient with disorder. My aunt offered me a simple explanation, and I chose it because it was simple." Aurelia's hand rested on the writing case. Simple explanations are often expensive for the person being explained away. He absorbed that. Then he asked the question he had come to ask. What exactly did Esther tell you? Aurelia's gaze hardened at once. She told me enough. That is not what I asked. I know. Hugh's frustration rose, but he mastered it. If I am to protect her, I need facts. If I am to deserve her confidence, I cannot hand you every word she spoke, because my reputation would benefit from doing so. She is my ward, and that gives you responsibility. It does not give you ownership of every frightened sentence she has ever spoken. The room went very still. Hugh stepped closer to the writing desk. At the same moment, Aurelia moved around it. Her glove brushed the sleeve of his coat. Barely a touch. Yet both stopped. For one suspended second, Hugh became sharply aware of how near she stood. Aurelia withdrew first. He moved back immediately. No apology for the contact, no attempt to prolong it, only space. Her eyes lifted to his again. He spoke more quietly. What can you tell me without betraying her? That she refused Giles. Nothing more, not yet. He looked toward the green writing case beneath her hand, then back to her face. You ask me to believe you while withholding the evidence that would make belief easy. Yes, there was no hesitation in it. Hugh should have found that infuriating. Instead, for the first time, he understood the shape of the choice she had made. She had not merely risked his house over the truth. She was still risking her own vindication to protect Esther, he said. Why would a woman invent imprisonment if the lie costs her home and gains her nothing? Aurelia regarded him steadily. That is the question you should have asked yesterday. He accepted the blow. When Hugh left Mrs. Pritchard's house, he carried no new confession, only a more dangerous certainty. Aurelia Fenwick was keeping something from him, and he was, beginning to believe she was, doing it for the right reason. By the following afternoon, Hugh had learned that Lady Agatha's management of Esther's courtship had been far more deliberate than he had first understood. The discovery came not from scandal, but from an ordinary stack of calling cards. He sat in the library at Caldermere House with 3 weeks of household engagement notes laid before him. There was nothing criminal in them, nothing that could be pointed to before a room and called proof. That almost made them worse. Miss Esther Bellamy had been invited to 2 musicales, a dinner in Grosvenor Square, an afternoon drive in Hyde Park, and a small supper after the opera. On every occasion, Giles Marchwood had been present. 2 other gentlemen who had asked permission to call upon Esther had somehow found their visits postponed. One had been told she was indisposed. Another had been informed that she was already promised to a family dinner. Hugh checked the dates again. The family dinner had included Giles. Mrs. Vale stood near the library door, her hands folded at her waist. Did Miss Bellamy ever ask that Mr. Marchwood be favoured above the others? The housekeeper hesitated. Not to my knowledge, Your Grace. Did my aunt give instructions concerning callers? She managed Miss Bellamy's social engagements. That is not what I asked. Mrs. Vale lowered her eyes. Yes, Your Grace. Hugh waited. She believed too much attention from unsuitable gentlemen would unsettle Miss Bellamy. And Giles was suitable. That was Lady Agatha's view. Hugh closed the appointment book. He had given his aunt that authority. That fact would not leave him. When Esther first came under his guardianship, he had thought himself practical. A duke with estates, parliamentary obligations, and no wife had no business directing the details of a young lady's season. Lady Agatha understood precedents, invitations, respectable families, proper appearances. He had called that competence. Now he wondered how often convenience had disguised itself as judgment. Has my aunt sent any announcement regarding an engagement? No, Your Grace. Good. Mrs. Vale looked relieved. Nothing is to be sent. Nothing is to be ordered. No settlements discussed. No jewels chosen. No dinner announced in honor of the match. Yes, Your Grace. He stopped her before she reached the door. And if my aunt gives contrary instructions, Mrs. Vale turned. You will tell her they came from me. Hugh's mouth tightened. No, you will tell me. He was not going to correct one chain of command by creating another. 2 hours later, he was once again in Mrs. Pritchard's parlor. Aurelia stood near the window when he entered, the green Morocco writing case open upon the desk behind her. Several sheets of correspondence lay beside it. But she closed the case without haste when Mrs. Pritchard announced him. Your Grace, Miss Fenwick. Mrs. Pritchard remained with them, sorting embroidery silks at a table near the hearth. Hugh did not waste time. My aunt has been arranging Esther's social life more closely than I knew. Aurelia's expression did not change. How closely? Giles has been present at nearly every private engagement. Other callers were discouraged or delayed. That sounds like Lady Agatha. You are not surprised. No, he watched her. Did Esther tell you that? Aurelia was silent for a moment. She told me enough to understand she felt crowded. Crowded is not the same as threatened. No. Did my aunt threaten her? Aurelia's gaze sharpened. That is precisely the kind of question I will not answer for her. Hugh's patience pulled taut. If there was a threat, Miss Fenwick, I need to know what it was. So that you may act? Yes. So that you may confront your aunt, if necessary. And then Lady Agatha will know exactly what Esther told me in confidence. That may be unavoidable. No. The refusal was quiet. Hugh stared at her. Aurelia stepped nearer the desk, placing one hand on its edge. If I betray her confidence to prove that I told the truth, then your aunt wins twice. He said nothing. She first teaches Esther that private refusal can be overruled. Aurelia continued. Then I teach her that private trust can be traded away when it becomes useful. You are asking me to intervene without knowing the full danger. I am asking you not to make her pay for my vindication. He turned away a fraction. Through the parlor window, carriage wheels passed along the street. The sound faded almost immediately. I have spent most of my life, he said, believing that uncertainty is simply a failure to gather sufficient information. Aurelia remained still. I dislike unresolved matters, he continued. I dislike disorder. I have always thought a clear instruction was preferable to prolonged confusion. That must be very comfortable when one is the person giving the instruction. The words should have offended him. They did not. He gave a brief, humorless breath. Yes, for the first time since entering, some of the severity left his face. I see the defect in it now. Aurelia studied him. Do you? I gave my aunt authority because I trusted her judgment. I gave myself permission not to look closely because she appeared competent. Yesterday, I tried to repair that by asking you for every fact at once. And today, I am trying to determine how much action is possible without forcing the very disclosure you are protecting. Aurelia's expression softened, but only slightly. That is a better question. Hugh looked back toward her. If Lady Agatha has done what you believe, I want it stopped. I know. I also want to confront her now. I know that too. He started toward the door. Aurelia moved before he reached it. Your Grace, he turned. She had come close enough that propriety should have made him more conscious of distance. Instead, what he noticed first was concern. Do not go back there angry with yourself and turn that anger into another command. His brow tightened. She locked my ward in a room, and you may still do harm if you decide that indignation gives you the right to choose every next step. I am responsible for Esther. Yes, and for what happens beneath my roof. Yes, then what would you have me do? Prevent what you can prevent. Do not force what you cannot yet understand. He opened his mouth to answer. Aurelia lifted her hand and placed 2 gloved fingers lightly against his wrist. The contact stopped him more effectively than any argument. Neither of them moved. It was not intimacy in any form society would recognize, barely a touch through cloth and leather. Yet Hugh felt the deliberateness of it. She had chosen to reach for him. Aurelia seemed to realize the same thing a heartbeat later, but she did not snatch her hand away. Do not make another decision Simply because deciding feels better than waiting, she said. Hugh looked down at her fingers, then back into her face. I will try. Only then did she withdraw. Mrs. Pritchard continued sorting silks without looking at either of them. A knock sounded at the front door. Moments later, a maid entered carrying a folded note. For Miss Fenwick. Aurelia broke the seal. Her eyes moved across the page. Hugh saw the change immediately. What is it? She handed him the note. Lady Agatha's handwriting covered only 4 lines. A garden luncheon would be held at Caldermere House in 2 days' time. Miss Esther Bellamy, it said, had requested the pleasure of announcing her engagement to Mr. Giles Marchwood among family and friends. Hugh read it twice. I forbade any announcement. Aurelia looked toward him, and yet here it is. His face hardened. This time, however, he did not turn toward the door. He folded the note once, then asked, What do you intend to do? Aurelia looked at Lady Agatha's invitation again. Nothing, unless Esther asks me to come. That request arrived before sunset. The request from Esther had contained only 1 sentence. Please come, if you can. Aurelia read it 3 times before folding the note and placing it inside her green Morocco writing case. 2 days later, she returned to Caldermere House. The garden luncheon had been arranged with the precision Lady Agatha favoured. White cloth covered the long tables beneath the south terrace. Silver dishes caught the pale autumn sun. Footmen moved between clusters of guests with practiced silence, while ladies in soft-coloured pelisses and gentlemen in dark coats spoke in the careful tones of people who believed themselves present for something pleasant. Nothing about the gathering looked coercive. That, Aurelia thought, was precisely the danger. Mrs. Pritchard had accompanied her, providing both propriety and quiet support. Aurelia entered the garden at her side and felt conversations falter by fractions. No one openly stared. No one needed to. Lady Agatha came forward smiling. Miss Fenwick, how kind of you to accept. Aurelia curtsied. Miss Bellamy asked me to come. The smile remained. Of course she did. Esther has been distressed by the unfortunate misunderstanding between us. She is eager, I think, to restore peace. There it was. Not accusation. Mercy. Lady Agatha had chosen the more elegant weapon. Aurelia looked beyond her. Esther stood near a stone urn filled with late roses. Giles Marchwood was beside her, attentive without appearing possessive. He offered her a plate. She accepted it. He said something that caused 2 ladies nearby to laugh. Anyone watching would have called him charming. Esther did not laugh. Her gaze found Aurelia. For 1 instant, relief flickered across her face. Then Lady Agatha touched Esther's arm. Not hard, barely at all. Esther's expression closed. Hugh stood several yards away, speaking with an elderly viscount. He looked toward Aurelia almost at once. He did not come to her. That mattered. Aurelia had not asked him to stand guard beside her, and he seemed determined not to turn his support into another public claim. When the Viscount moved away, Hugh inclined his head in greeting. Miss Fenwick, Your Grace. His eyes searched her face. You received Esther's note. I did. Nothing has changed in my instructions. She knew what he meant. No formal marriage arrangements. No settlements. No announcement issued under his authority. Before she could answer, Lady Agatha raised her glass lightly with one gloved hand. The conversations around them softened. My friends, she said, I hope you will forgive an old woman a little sentiment. Aurelia felt the air tighten. Hugh's expression sharpened. Lady Agatha continued before he could interrupt. There has been some confusion in recent days concerning my dear Esther's future. Concern, as we know, can sometimes become imagination when affection outruns judgment. Her gaze touched Aurelia only briefly. That was enough. Several guests looked toward her, not cruelly, worse, with sympathy. Lady Agatha turned to Esther. My dear, perhaps you would settle the matter more gracefully than any of us can. Giles offered Esther his hand. She did not take it. Aurelia watched Hugh. He had gone very still. Esther, he said, only her name. A warning, perhaps, or permission. Aurelia could not tell which. Lady Agatha's smile never changed. No one is forcing anything, Hugh. Let the girl speak. Every face turned toward Esther. Aurelia saw the moment panic caught her, not in her eyes, in her wrist. Esther's fingers curled inward and pressed against the pulse beneath her glove, the same gesture Aurelia had seen when she first whispered that she had refused Giles. Aurelia wanted to cross the lawn. She did not. If she intervened now, Lady Agatha would prove her point without saying another word. Aurelia would become the woman who could not allow Esther to speak for herself. So Aurelia remained where she was. Esther looked at Giles, then at Lady Agatha, then at Hugh. Last of all, she looked at Aurelia. "I have been very foolish," Esther said. The words were soft, but the garden had gone quiet enough that everyone heard them. Lady Agatha's expression warmed. Esther drew a breath. "I have caused unnecessary distress, Mr. Marchwood has been patient with me." Giles inclined his head. Aurelia felt something cold settle beneath her ribs. Esther continued, "I wish to marry him." A murmur moved through the guests. Not shock, relief. The crisis had been solved. Lady Agatha lowered her glass with perfect composure. "There, you see, nothing darker than a young woman uncertain before a serious step." A woman near the terrace murmured that such nerves were perfectly natural. Someone else said Esther was fortunate to have a family so concerned for her happiness. Aurelia heard every word. She did not move. Lady Agatha finally looked directly at her. "I hope, Miss Fenwick, you understand how easily affection may magnify a private hesitation into something it was never meant to become." Aurelia could have defended herself. She could have repeated what Esther had said. She could have told the entire garden that a frightened woman's yes did not erase an earlier no. Instead, she answered, "I understand that Miss Bellamy has spoken. Nothing more." Lady Agatha had expected either retreat or confrontation. For the first time, her smile thinned. The luncheon resumed. It was worse than open humiliation, because no one treated Aurelia as disgraced. They treated her as mistaken. A concerned woman, an over-imaginative woman, perhaps a lonely woman who had made herself important by inventing danger. Aurelia endured it without leaving. She had come because Esther asked. She would not punish Esther for failing to become brave on command. Near the end of the luncheon, Hugh approached her beneath the shadow of the terrace. Mrs. Pritchard stood within sight, speaking with another guest. Hugh kept his voice low. "Do you still stand by what you told me?" Aurelia looked at him. This was the moment she had feared, not Lady Agatha's triumph, his doubt. "Yes," he held her gaze, "even after today. Yes." Something in his face settled, not certainty, choice. "Then so do I," he said, "until I know why she cannot." For the first time that afternoon, Aurelia nearly lost her composure. Not because he had rescued her. He had not. Not because he had proved anything. He could not. He had simply chosen not to make convenience more trustworthy than her word. Across the garden, Esther was being escorted toward the terrace by Lady Agatha. As she passed Aurelia, she did not stop. She did not speak. But her hand rose briefly to her wrist. 2 fingers pressed against the pulse beneath her glove, then fell. Aurelia saw it. So did Hugh. Lady Agatha leaned toward him once Esther had passed. "This delay must end. You are making a spectacle of the poor girl. Giles has honor to consider, and Esther has a reputation that will not survive endless questioning." Hugh's gaze remained on Esther. Lady Agatha's voice softened. "If you continue this, nephew, it will be your interference that ruins her." Aurelia watched his face. This time, he did not answer at once. Lady Agatha did not wait until the last guest had left before pressing her advantage. She found Hugh in the library less than an hour after the luncheon, with Giles beside her and the garden doors still open behind them. "You saw what happened," she said. "Esther spoke before witnesses. She accepted Giles, yet you continue to treat the poor girl as though she were incapable of knowing her own mind." Hugh stood near the desk, one hand resting against its edge. I continue to treat uncertainty as uncertainty. Uncertainty? Giles repeated. She said she wishes to marry me, and 3 days ago Miss Fenwick said Esther had refused you. Giles's expression tightened. Lady Agatha gave a weary sigh. Must this house now be governed by Miss Fenwick's impressions? No, then end it. Hugh looked at her. His aunt softened her tone. You are damaging Esther more with each delay. People have begun to whisper. A young woman may survive a brief hesitation before marriage. She does not easily survive public speculation that she has been coerced by her own family. She has been placed under pressure. By whom? Hugh said nothing. Lady Agatha spread her hands. There. You have no accusation Esther herself will support. What you have is an anxious girl, an overprotective acquaintance, and a household being pushed towards scandal because you are afraid to appear unjust twice. The words struck nearer than Hugh liked. Giles stepped forward. There is a simple way to finish this. Hugh's gaze shifted to him. If Miss Fenwick publicly admits that she misunderstood Esther, I will withdraw from the engagement. Lady Agatha turned sharply. Giles! He lifted a hand. If my presence is the cause of all this misery, I will remove it, but Miss Fenwick cannot be permitted to accuse my mother of confinement and manipulation, then walk away with her own reputation untouched, while ours is damaged. Hugh's expression hardened. Giles continued. Let her say she was mistaken. Esther's name is restored. Mother's name is restored. I withdraw without resentment, and Miss Fenwick becomes a liar, a mistaken woman who lost her home because she refused to apologize for something you now propose she publicly retract. Giles flushed. Lady Agatha said quietly, You cannot protect everyone, Hugh. No, the answer was immediate. But I can refuse to purchase peace with one woman's humiliation. For the first time, Lady Agatha's composure cracked. You are allowing Aurelia Fenwick to turn you against your own family. Hugh's eyes cooled. Do not confuse my questions with her influence. He rang for Mrs. Vale. When the housekeeper entered, he said, No marriage preparations are to proceed. No jeweler, solicitor, modiste, or clergyman is to receive instructions concerning Miss Bellamy and Mr. Marchwood. Lady Agatha stared at him. You cannot hold Esther suspended indefinitely. I do not intend to. He looked toward Mrs. Vale. Send a note to Lady Winifred Ashcombe. Ask whether she will receive Esther for several days. Lady Agatha stiffened. Lady Winifred was Hugh's widowed godmother, old enough to fear no one's displeasure and independent enough that Agatha could not manage her household. This is absurd. It is distance. From her family? From persuasion? Giles took a step toward him. Hugh, do not. The Duke's voice was quiet. That ended the discussion. By late afternoon, Hugh stood once more in Mrs. Pritchard's parlour. Aurelia listened without interrupting as he explained Lady Agatha's argument and Giles' proposed bargain. When he finished, she said, And what did you answer? That peace bought with your public humiliation was not peace. Her expression altered slightly. He was beginning to understand how little praise moved her compared with simple accuracy. Esther will stay with Lady Winifred Ashcombe for several days, he continued. My aunt will not accompany her, neither will Giles. Aurelia released a breath. That is something. It is not everything. No. Hugh looked toward the green Morocco writing case on the small desk. There is still a question I could ask you. Aurelia's gaze met his. He did not need to say which one. What exactly did Esther tell you? The silence stretched. If you gave me every word, he said, I might know how far the pressure went. I might know what to confront. You might, and you still will not. No, he had expected the answer. What surprised him was that he no longer felt anger at it, only the discomfort of not knowing. He crossed toward the window, then stopped. What do you want me to do? Aurelia was silent for a moment. It was the first time he had asked her that without first deciding the acceptable answer. Halt the marriage preparations, she said. Done. Give Esther time somewhere, Lady Agatha and Giles cannot shape every hour. Done. And when you speak to her, ask no question whose answer she cannot give freely. Hugh turned. That is harder. Yes. What if she continues to say she wishes to marry him? Then listen to how she says it. Listen to whether her reasons are hers. And do not make her prove fear before you allow her time. He absorbed that. You are asking me to act without certainty. I am asking you to accept that uncertainty is preferable to a false certainty extracted by pressure. A faint sound escaped him, almost a laugh. You make a poor companion for a man who likes decisions. I have never claimed to be convenient. No. His gaze lingered on her. That much is becoming very clear. Aurelia looked away first, but not before he saw the warmth that touched her expression. He should have left then. Instead, he remained where he was. I am going back to Caldermere House now, he said. Esther will leave for Lady Winifred's before dinner. Aurelia nodded. Hugh hesitated. Will you trust me to do this without taking her story from you? The question was quieter than anything else he had said. Aurelia looked at him for a long moment. Then she crossed the small space between them and placed her hand in his. Hugh's fingers closed around hers carefully. He did not pull her nearer. He did not speak. For several heartbeats, they simply stood there, her gloved hand resting in his, as though trust could be measured by the absence of force. Aurelia was the one who finally said, yes. His thumb shifted once against the back of her glove, then stilled. I will not make you regret it. Do not promise that. His brow lifted. Promise only that if you make another mistake, you will see it. Something in his face softened. That I can promise. When he released her hand, it was with visible reluctance and perfect restraint. The next morning, a note arrived from Lady Winifred Ashcombe. It was addressed not to Hugh, but to Aurelia. Miss Bellamy asks whether you will come to her. Lady Winifred Ashcombe's drawing room had none of Caldermere House's polished tension. It was smaller, warmer, and arranged for comfort rather than display. A fire burned low beneath the marble mantel. Books lay open where they had actually been read. Lady Winifred herself occupied a chair near the window, spectacles in hand, making no pretense of embroidery, merely to justify her presence. Esther sat opposite Aurelia on a narrow sofa. For several moments after Aurelia arrived, neither young woman spoke. Then Esther said, I am sorry, Aurelia leaned forward. For what? For making you look like a liar? No. Esther flinched. Aurelia softened her voice. You do not owe me an apology for being frightened. Tears filled Esther's eyes, but she blinked them back. I did refuse, Giles. I know. I said it plainly. I thought that would be enough. Aurelia waited. Esther looked toward Lady Winifred, who gave a small nod, and then returned her attention to the book in her lap. Lady Agatha told me I was behaving like a child, Esther continued. She said Mr. Marchwood had been patient with me, that the match was excellent, and that I would embarrass his grace if I rejected a man everyone already believed I favored. And the conservatory, Esther's fingers folded tightly together. She took me there because I would not stop saying no. Aurelia felt something cold pass through her. She shut the door. She told me I needed time to become reasonable. Then I heard the bolt. Esther looked ashamed of the next words. I struck the door with the vinaigrette. Her gaze lifted quickly. You found it? Yes. I had it in my hand. It was my mother's. I thought if I struck the panel hard enough, someone might hear. The lid was dented. Esther gave a faint, broken laugh. I thought I had ruined it. Aurelia reached across the space between them, but stopped before touching her. Esther, what happened after you came out? Lady Agatha told me Giles would be ruined if I made a public refusal. She said people would think he had behaved improperly. She said His Grace had trusted her to guide me, and that I was repaying everyone with ingratitude. Aurelia said nothing. She told me you had already lost your place because you encouraged me to be stubborn. That was not your doing. I believed it was. Esther finally began to cry, not loudly. That made it worse. I thought if I said yes, then at least no one else would lose anything because of me. Aurelia moved closer. You were made responsible for everyone's peace except your own. Esther covered her face for a moment. When she lowered her hands again, something had changed. The fear remained, but beneath it was anger. I want to tell His Grace. Aurelia watched her carefully. You do not have to. I know. You do not owe anyone public courage simply because the truth exists. I know. And if you tell him, what happens next must still be your choice. Esther breathed slowly. I want him to know, and I want him to stop Giles from calling on me. Only that. Esther's mouth tightened. No. She looked directly at Aurelia. I want the people who heard me say yes to hear me say why. Hugh arrived at Lady Winifred's house shortly after noon. He did not enter the drawing room until Esther herself sent word that she wished to see him. Aurelia noticed that. So did Esther. Hugh came in alone after Lady Winifred admitted him, his expression controlled but alert. He bowed to Esther first. You sent for me? Yes, Your Grace. He did not sit until she indicated the chair opposite her. Then he waited. Esther told him everything, not gracefully, not in perfect order. She stopped twice to gather herself. Once she asked Aurelia whether she had remembered the wording correctly. Aurelia answered only what Esther asked, and nothing more. Hugh did not interrupt. When Esther finished, he looked toward her hands. You said you struck the conservatory door. Yes. With your vinaigrette? Yes, I have it. Relief crossed her face. I thought perhaps Lady Agatha had taken it. No, Miss Fenwick placed it before me. It has remained locked in my escritoire since that evening. The continuity of the object seemed to steady Esther more than any reassurance could have. Hugh turned slightly. I also had the gardener examine the conservatory fastening this morning. Aurelia looked at him. He confirmed the exterior bolt is not normally drawn while the room is occupied. The scrape beside it is recent. He repainted that section of the passage less than a fortnight ago. Esther closed her eyes briefly. There it was, not proof replacing her voice, proof supporting it. Hugh looked back at her. What do you want done? Esther opened her eyes. I want the engagement ended. It is ended. And I want Lady Agatha to stop telling people that I was merely nervous. Hugh nodded. Do you want this kept within the family? Esther hesitated, then shook her head. No, not anymore. Aurelia saw the decision settle into her. The same people who heard me accept him should hear the truth. Hugh's expression changed. Not alarm. Respect. Then they will. Later, after Esther had gone upstairs with Lady Winifred to rest, Aurelia remained in the drawing room. Hugh stood near the mantel. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said, I owe you more than the apology I gave before. Aurelia did not rescue him from the silence. He continued, I thought my mistake was failing to investigate. It was part of it. Yes. His jaw tightened. The larger wrong was that I used authority to decide which speech was convenient enough to believe. Aurelia looked at him. I demanded an apology because it would have restored order quickly. Lady Agatha demanded Esther's consent for the same reason. His voice lowered. I made different demands. The principle was not different enough. That was the sentence Aurelia had not known she needed to hear. Hugh did not step closer. I will clear your name publicly because it is mine to repair. That creates no debt between us. Her throat tightened. No debt. None. And if I never return to Caldermere House, his face changed, but he did not look away. Then I will still know you were right to leave it. The answer broke the last of her restraint. Aurelia crossed the distance between them. She put her arms around him. Hugh went absolutely still, for one heartbeat, then another. Only, when she held him more firmly, did his arms come around her, carefully, fully, no possession in it, only relief. Aurelia closed her eyes against his shoulder. He did not ask for more. When they parted, neither pretended the embrace had meant nothing. Hugh looked toward the door through which Esther had gone. She wants them all told. Yes, then tomorrow they will hear her. Aurelia drew a steady breath, and this time his gaze returned to hers. "This time," he said, "she speaks first." By 11 the next morning, the drawing room at Caldermere House was full enough to make retreat difficult and small enough to make every silence visible. Lady Agatha had expected a correction. She had invited precisely the people whose approval mattered most. Two matrons who had attended the garden luncheon, Lord and Lady Havisham, the elderly Viscount who had spoken with Hugh that day, and 3 ladies whose opinions travelled faster through Mayfair than any formal announcement. Esther entered beside Lady Winifred Ashcombe, not beside Giles. That was the first disruption. The second came when Hugh crossed the room and offered Esther the seat nearest the hearth, rather than the place Lady Agatha had prepared beside her son. Lady Agatha's smile did not alter. "My dear Hugh, surely all this ceremony is unnecessary." Esther wished only to correct a misunderstanding. "Yes," Esther said. Every head turned toward her. She had gone pale, but she did not look at Aurelia. Not yet. Aurelia stood near Mrs. Pritchard at the side of the room, far enough from Esther that no one could claim she was prompting her. Hugh remained behind Esther's chair, not touching it, not standing before her. Lady Agatha settled onto the sofa. "Then, perhaps we can put this unfortunate business behind us." Esther's hands rested in her lap. For one moment, Aurelia saw the old gesture begin. 2 fingers moved toward her wrist, then stopped. Esther lifted her chin. "I did refuse, Mr. Marchwood." The room became utterly still. Giles took a step forward. "Esther." She turned toward him. "No." It was the first time Aurelia had heard her say the word publicly. Giles stopped. Esther drew a breath. "I refused him before the garden luncheon. I refused him before Miss Fenwick left this house. Lady Agatha told me I was behaving foolishly, and that I would disgrace his grace if I persisted." Lady Agatha's expression hardened. "You were hysterical. I was frightened. You were confused. I knew I did not wish to marry Giles." A murmur stirred near the windows. Lady Agatha glanced toward the guests, as though inviting them to recognize the childishness of the scene. Instead, Esther continued. "She took me to the conservatory because I would not stop saying no." Lady Agatha rose. "That is enough." Hugh's voice came quietly from behind Esther. "No," his aunt turned. He did not raise his voice. "You said she should be allowed to speak." Lady Agatha's face changed. Esther went on. "The door was closed. Then I heard the bolt." One of the matrons inhaled sharply. Giles said, "Mother only wished you to compose yourself." Esther looked at him. "You knew I had refused you." He opened his mouth. She did not allow him to answer first. "And you came the next day as though I had accepted." Giles flushed. "I believed you would reconsider." "You believed I should. That is not the same thing. To me it was." Aurelia felt Mrs. Pritchard's hand tighten around the handle of her reticule. Esther's voice trembled now, but she did not stop. "I struck the conservatory door because I thought no one would hear me otherwise." Hugh crossed to his escritoire. He unlocked it. From the drawer he removed the dented silver vinaigrette and carried it to the center table. He did not hand it to Esther. He simply placed it where everyone could see. "This belongs to Miss Bellamy," he said. "Miss Fenwick found it inside the conservatory on the afternoon in question. It has remained in my possession since she placed it before me." Lady Agatha laughed once, without humor. "A dented trinket proves nothing." "No," Hugh said. Esther looked at the silver object. "The dent happened when I struck it against the door." Hugh nodded toward the far side of the room. Mr. Crowley, Caldermere's head gardener, had been waiting near the doorway, clearly uncomfortable among so many titled guests. "Mr. Crowley," the gardener stepped forward. Hugh asked, "When was the passage beside the conservatory bolt last painted?" 11 days ago, Your Grace. And when you examined it yesterday, fresh scrape through the green paint, Your Grace. Metal drawn hard across the plate. Recent. Is the exterior bolt normally fastened when anyone is inside? No, Your Grace. Lady Agatha's cheeks reddened. This is becoming absurd. A gardener's scrape, a damaged vinaigrette, and a nervous girl's recollection are being arranged into an accusation against me. Aurelia spoke for the first time. I heard Esther inside. Every gaze shifted toward her. She kept her voice level. I found the exterior bolt drawn. I opened it. I found Miss Bellamy distressed inside and the vinaigrette on the floor. Lady Agatha turned sharply. And you immediately decided the worst. No. Aurelia met her gaze. I decided only what I had seen. The door was bolted. Esther had previously told me she refused your son. You inserted yourself into a family matter. I told the truth about what I witnessed, nothing more. No confidential sentence Esther had not chosen to reveal. Esther looked at Aurelia then. Gratitude passed between them without either speaking. Giles moved toward his mother. This can still be settled quietly. Esther turned on him. No. He froze. There will be no engagement. Esther, think carefully. I have. You will regret making this public. Hugh stepped forward. That was all. Giles looked at him and stopped speaking. Lady Agatha's composure finally fractured. I did what was necessary. She would have been grateful once the matter was settled. The words hung in the room. Lady Winifred's expression became cold. Grateful? Lady Agatha looked around as though surprised to find no ally. She is 20. She is inexperienced. Giles is respectable. The match is excellent. Young women do not always understand what will make them happy. Esther rose from her chair. That was never your decision. No one moved. Then Esther crossed to the center table and took up her vinaigrette. She held it in both hands. The engagement is ended. This time, no one contradicted her. Hugh turned to his aunt. You will no longer manage Miss Bellamy's social engagements or any part of my household. Lady Agatha stared at him. You cannot mean to cast me out over this. I mean that you will leave Caldermere House today. Giles stepped forward again. Hugh. Hugh looked at him. You are no longer welcome to court under my roof. Any future patronage you expected from me ends here. Giles went white. This is excessive. No, Hugh's gaze moved to Esther. It is late. Lady Agatha said nothing more. She did not need to. The room had understood. After a long moment, she turned and walked out. Giles followed. No one attempted to stop them. Hugh waited until the door had closed. Then he faced the room. Aurelia felt something in her chest tighten. He could have ended it there. He had exposed the coercion, protected Esther, removed his aunt's authority. Instead, he looked directly at Aurelia. There is another wrong to correct. Lady Havisham shifted in her chair. Hugh did not look away. Miss Fenwick spoke truth in this house before I was willing to hear it. The room remained silent. I demanded an apology from her before I had asked the necessary questions. Aurelia stood perfectly still. He continued. My aunt's account had power because I gave it power. It was easier for me to command peace than to examine whether peace was being purchased with someone else's silence. His voice did not falter. That failure was mine. Aurelia felt the weight of every person listening. Hugh bowed his head to her. Miss Fenwick, I was wrong. I am sorry. He did not ask whether she forgave him. He did not cross the room. He did not turn the apology into spectacle. Aurelia inclined her head. That was all she gave him publicly, and he accepted it. Later, when the morning callers had gone, and Esther had returned upstairs with Lady Winifred, Aurelia found Hugh near the garden doors. The house felt strangely quiet without Lady Agatha's authority pressing through it. Aurelia looked toward the conservatory. Is it still bolted? Hugh followed her gaze. No, I had the bolt removed. She turned to him. That was not what I asked. He frowned, then understood. Aurelia had not asked whether he had solved the door. She had asked whether it could still be closed. His expression softened. No, he said. I suppose it was not. They stood together for a moment. Then Hugh offered his hand. Aurelia placed hers in it. He did not lead her toward the conservatory. They walked instead into the garden, side by side. 4 days passed before Aurelia returned to Caldermere House. This time, no one had summoned her to answer an accusation. Esther had written in her own hand, "Please come to tea. Lady Winifred says, I must begin learning how to invite people because I wish to see them, not because someone else has decided I ought to." Aurelia had smiled when she read it. She arrived shortly after 3, with her green Morocco writing case tucked beneath one arm. Esther met her in the drawing room. There was colour in her face again. "I am going to stay with Lady Winifred for several weeks," she said after they had embraced. "Perhaps longer. You are certain." "I am certain I want time in which no one discusses my marriage prospects." "That sounds very sensible." Esther gave her a crooked smile. "I thought so too." The vinaigrette rested on a small table beside her chair. Its dent had not been repaired. Aurelia glanced at it. Esther noticed, "I think I shall leave it as it is." "Why?" "Because it reminds me that I was trying to be heard even before I knew how to speak." Aurelia reached for her hand. Esther squeezed once, then released it. "There is someone else who has been trying very hard not to speak too soon," she said. Aurelia looked toward the doorway. Hugh stood there. He had evidently heard enough to know he had been discussed, but not enough to know whether he should retreat. Esther rose. "I promised Lady Winifred I would call upon her before we leave for Richmond tomorrow." Her innocence was entirely unconvincing. Aurelia almost laughed. "Esther, yes, you arranged this. I invited you to tea. What happens after tea is none of my concern." Then she kissed Aurelia's cheek and left with her maid. Hugh waited until the outer door had closed. Only then did he enter fully. "Miss Fenwick, Your Grace." His gaze dropped to the writing case. "You brought it back. For an afternoon." Something in his face tightened, then eased. "I understand." He did not ask whether she intended to stay. He did not ask whether she had forgiven him. Instead, he said, "Would you walk with me?" Aurelia nodded. They crossed the drawing room and passed through the long corridor toward the garden. When they reached the conservatory doors, Hugh stopped. The brass bolt was gone. Only 2 small marks remained in the painted wood where it had once been fixed. Aurelia touched neither. Hugh stood beside her. "I had thought removing it would mean something," he said. "It does." He looked at her. "But not everything." "No." A faint smile touched his mouth. "I am becoming accustomed to discovering that distinction." They stepped into the garden instead. Autumn had thinned the roses. The gravel path was scattered with copper-colored leaves, and beyond the low wall the sound of carriage wheels carried faintly from the street. Hugh walked beside her without offering his arm. After several moments, he said, "I have missed you." Aurelia turned her head. The admission appeared to cost him more than his public apology had. He continued before she could answer. "I have missed arguing with you. I have missed being told that my first solution is often not my best one. That seems an alarming thing for a duke to enjoy. I did not say I enjoyed it." She smiled. He looked at her then, fully. "And I have missed knowing you were in the next room." The humor left her. Hugh stopped walking. Aurelia. It was the first time he had used her given name. Not carelessly, not as a claim. He looked almost uncertain after saying it. She did not correct him. His voice lowered. "I have spent much of my life disguising feeling as responsibility, because responsibility is easier to defend." She listened. "I could tell myself I was concerned for your reputation, concerned for Esther, concerned for my household. All those things were true." He drew a breath. "But there is another truth, and I will not hide it behind duty." Aurelia's heart began to beat harder. "I love you, Aurelia." He said it plainly. No kneeling, no ring produced from a pocket, no expectation disguised as romance. "I do not say that because I corrected your name before society. I should have done that whether you ever wished to see me again." She held his gaze. "You owe me nothing for what I repaired. Not gratitude, not forgiveness, certainly not affection." The man who had once demanded an answer now stood waiting for one he had given her complete freedom to refuse. Aurelia felt something inside her settle. "I know. His expression changed slightly. She stepped closer. I did not begin to love you when you believed me. He said nothing. I began to love you when belief became difficult and you chose not to force certainty from me. His eyes closed for the briefest instant. And I love you now, she said. When he looked at her again, all his careful restraint was still there. But the loneliness beneath it was not hidden anymore. Aurelia held out her hand. He took it. I want to see the conservatory, she said. Hugh's fingers tightened once around hers, then released. He walked with her to the doors. At the threshold, he stopped. Aurelia went inside alone. The room was warm beneath the glass roof. The roses near the western wall had been cut back. Fresh soil filled several clay pots where late herbs were being moved indoors. Nothing dramatic had changed. That mattered too. It was only a room. Aurelia walked to the center, then turned. Hugh remained outside, waiting. She smiled. Are you coming? His face softened. Only if you are asking. I am. He stepped inside. Aurelia reached for his hand again. For a moment, they stood where fear had once been turned into obedience. Now there was only choice. Hugh lifted her hand slightly. May I kiss you? Yes. He came closer slowly enough that she could have changed her mind. She did not. His kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent. Aurelia answered it. Her free hand rested against his coat, drawing him nearer by her own choice. When they parted, Hugh pressed his forehead briefly to hers. No triumph, no possession, only warmth. I am not asking you to marry me today, he said. That may be the most intelligent thing you have ever said. He laughed then, a real laugh. Aurelia had never heard it before. I had hoped for something more flattering. You may earn it. I intend to. Their courtship lasted through the winter. Hugh called properly. Aurelia refused him invitations when she did not wish to attend and accepted others when she did. Esther spent several months with Lady Winifred and ended the season unmarried entirely by choice. Society adjusted because society always did when sufficiently powerful people refused to pretend a wrong had been harmless. Lady Agatha did not return to Caldermere House. Giles found no renewed patronage from Hugh and no path back to Esther. By spring, when Hugh finally asked Aurelia to marry him, he asked in the library with no witnesses and no assumption of her answer. She said yes. Months later, Aurelia's green Morocco writing case rested on a small desk placed beside Hugh's in the library. Not behind it, beside it. One autumn afternoon they walked again to the conservatory. The doors stood open to the garden. Hugh entered first this time, then turned toward her. Aurelia stepped inside, carrying her writing case. Behind them, the open doors admitted cool air and the scent of wet leaves. Hugh did not reach to close them. Aurelia looked back. Then, because the room was growing cold, and because the choice was hers, she crossed to the doors and shut them herself. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.